Today we've got a malicious compliance story that results in some money going bye-bye. We'll get into that one in just a bit, but first, move your cars. Hi, might ramble a little as I've had a drink, but I've remembered a great story for you. A couple years ago, I used to be a waste collector. On my first week, I turned up at clients, and where their waste was, I had to squeeze down a path with the building on one side and cars on the other. As I'm trying to avoid all the cars, I accidentally popped the end of the guttering of the building. No massive problem, I thought. The manager storms out. I say, I've just had to replace this whole guttering because of one of your lot. Then I go, okay, I'm sorry and I understand, but I've got to maneuver around these vehicles as well. The manager clearly wasn't happy and I continued the day. The next week I head back. I stop at the front of the alley and I go in and make every single car move so I don't have to squeeze through anymore. Took 15 minutes of waiting, but oh well. I did this every week until I left, pulling people out of meetings to move their cars even if I could squeeze down just to be safe. Never changed, but I felt a little sense of accomplishment as I got paid hourly, and people had to take time out of their day to appease this woman. Well, as you said, you get paid hourly, so milk those hours as much as you possibly can. What did you say to me? Replied. When I plowed snow, the owner of the company had a rule to stay 2 feet from all cars. 2 wide driveway with a car on one side at the end, mark it as a trip with a note and move on. Customers were all aware of this, and if you wanted closer to your garage door, shoveling was an option. The only exception was the narrow driveway, due to a step for an older lady, but it was very clearly marked and well lit. Our next story is, shut my mouth and do what I was told? Absolutely! When I was in college, I worked as a baker for a well-known regional bagel and sandwich chain. At some point, an assistant manager transferred to my store who was the stereotypical petty, power-tripping, ridiculous manager you find in this type of job. Her specialty was yelling at and berating employees in front of customers. I'll never not believe that she enjoyed publicly humiliating people. It was tolerable until I agreed to cover a shift at the store she transferred from. Someone there asked me what I thought of her. I thought I was careful as I just commented that she had very high expectations, which were hard for some people to meet. Understatement of the year. Well, this lovely person passed this back to her, which shot me to the top of her crap list. What followed was a series of write-ups for egregious violations, like missing some seeds when mopping the floor or not emptying a garbage can that had a single paper towel in it. Lucky for me, I was one of the few people there certified to run the ovens. My opportunity for malicious compliance came one Saturday lunchtime when a charter bus pulled up. I'd seen this before and knew that a bus full of people buying sandwiches is equivalent to 2 to 3 people bringing bagels to work. Barely a blip compared to morning rush. I went to the counter to help and Miss Assistant Manager yells at me to get back into the kitchen and start baking more. I tried to tell her we were fine, but as soon as I opened my mouth, she yelled, "Shut your goddamn mouth! Do what I told you and don't stop baking until I say stop." 2 important things to know is that first, when I took my certification test, they told me I passed it with the second fastest time on record for the local franchise. The second thing is that the ovens were adjustable. You could turn up the heat to speed up the cooking process. I went back to the baking area, cranked up the oven, and baked as fast as I possibly could. The ovens had 8 shelves, holding about 48 bagels each. Eventually, I had them all filled up and was only gated by how fast they could cook, and I could send them up front. Miss Assistant Manager was down at the register this whole time and was not paying attention to stock levels in the bagel bins. I kept bringing out shelf after shelf. At one point, the bins were overflowing, so I had to start putting them in extra bins we kept in the back. Once those were full, I started putting them in on metal trays. The crowd finally died down, and Miss Assistant Manager finally looks at the bagel bins and realizes she never told me to stop. She asked me if there was anything still baking, and I informed her that every shelf was full. She lost it and started yelling that I was getting fired until multiple people pointed out that I just did exactly what she asked. The store manager ended up coming in and pretty much everyone told him the exact same story. Miss Assistant Manager had to bag up the mountains of excess bagels and drive them to all the other stores in the area so that they wouldn't go to waste. Even after that, we still exceeded the allowed wastage for the day, and she was reprimanded. She still yelled at everyone after that, but she was at least more careful in her wording. Yeah, OP, you didn't do anything wrong here. You did, technically, exactly what you were told, and, more bagels, more love to go around. At least people didn't go hungry that day. Still not Elf replied. Sounds like she's got some managerial skills as the hole in the middle of a bagel. Also, I'm very interested in an oven where you can go hotter to make things cook faster. What other foods does that work on? Our next story is, wipe my computer? Sure thing. You didn't say anything about saving the important information on it first. Inspired by a few recent posts, I thought I'd tell the story of malicious compliance committed many years ago by my friend. We'll call her Samantha, who worked, and still works, as an accountant. She wasn't a manager or anything, but she had been there for more than 5 years and basically knew so much about how the place ran that she really was a manager in all but title. Samantha was told that she would be stepping down to a lower position, and therefore lower pay, for quote, operational and restructuring reasons, but it was really so that the boss's daughter could replace her. The boss also told her that she would be responsible for training his daughter, who not only had no accounting qualification, but had never even held so much as a fast food or retail job. The boss estimated it would take several months to train her. What went unsaid was the fact that Samantha would inevitably be given the boot altogether as soon as her replacement was somewhat competent, so at this point she knew her days were numbered. Samantha quite rightly said, no, if she needs that much training, she's not fit for the job. So the boss made life miserable for a few months until she had to quit for her own well-being, which worked out for the best as she had a new job in less than a fortnight. The day she left, the boss stood over her with his daughter, claiming that she was the new supervisor to add insult to injury, and demanded she wipe her company computer. Still having some sense of morality, even though this boss didn't deserve it, Samantha asked if he was sure and that he might want to take some backups from it first. Before she could finish speaking, he yelled over her to quote, just get on with it and wipe it clean. She shrugged and did as she was told. What the boss didn't realize, or had forgotten, was Samantha had been instructed by him to create social media accounts and pages on various platforms for their accounting company's branch several years earlier. But that because the boss was anal and paranoid and didn't want them linked to any of their official company emails for some reason, he told her to set them up with her own email account and manage their social media promotion posts in her own name. Not wanting to do that, she created a new email account through Outlook or whatever and used that instead to set up the accounts on Facebook, Instagram, etc. Boss called her in a panic about a week after Samantha had quit because his daughter had tried to access the Facebook account so they could post some advertising in the lead up to tax time, but couldn't even log in. Samantha said she no longer had the details of the login credentials and passwords and couldn't help him. He said, "You must have written them down somewhere." She replied, "Yes, they were in a notepad document on the desktop of my computer." The computer that had been wiped the day she left the company. Well, first of all, props to Samantha for taking the high ground and A, suggesting that you get a backup of the files first, and B, for even, answering the phone after she had already left. This boss sucks and is deservedly paying the price for his obvious nepotism. Professional Call responded, "This reminds me of a story from my student days. To earn a bit extra, I moonlighted as a security guard, and one of our jobs was to guard a warehouse that stored flat-pack kitchens. This was in the mid-'80s when there was an energy and especially oil crisis. Well, one shift, a notice was issued that we had to ensure the loading bay plates were in the up position. As a very green 19-year-old, I had no idea what the loading bay plates were. Thankfully, my manager called a little while later to confirm the instructions. I said I didn't know what they were and asked if they were the shutters the lorries backed up to. He said yes. That seemed a crazy thing to do, so I double-checked. You want me to put all the loading bay plates, shutters up? Yes, okay. I then spent the next hour or so doing just that. Some were electric, so very easy. Others were manual and not the easiest task, but I had had a written introduction to do it, followed by verbal instruction and confirmation. I did as I was told. The next day, all heck broke loose. The loading bay plates turned out to be the little flaps at the bottom of the doors to provide a ramp onto the lorries. They should have just been shut to keep the heat in. Opening the shutters had caused them to waste a massive amount of valuable oil, and the weather had also damaged some stock. The company we were contracted to were pretty ticked off, but as I said, I had a written instruction, a verbal instruction, and I had checked that's actually what was required, so I was in the clear. I'm sure someone got one heck of a grilling for it, though no one lost their job. Our next story is, manager says it's my fault I got stiffed $600 at the adult club after guy couldn't pay. Yes, this will be long. Too bad. So this weekend at my adult, yes, strip club, which I've been doing this for over 9 years on and off now, I sat, not literally clearly, in the VIP with someone for almost 2 hours. This is $800. There are about 7 signs all over the walls. This has only ever happened one other time, but he ended up having his friends come in and spot him because the cops were going to be called. Most clubs have the girls' backs. Almost every other one I've ever worked at has our back. Bouncers will literally fight guys before letting them leave with a bill. This is the first club I've ever worked at that does not. Keep in mind, the manager and bouncer make their money from us. The club pays them, but not as much as we do. A few weeks ago, I paid the fairly new manager $100 in tips because he stayed an hour after closing for me, plus the 2 other girls that stayed tipped him pretty well also. The guy talked to the manager, and because the manager was in a bad mood, he just let it go and told the guy fine, pay $200 since that's what you have. The guy had another girl there that he saw regularly, so clearly he knew what was up. The guy lied and said I never told him when we were doing another dance, and he thought it was all one dance. Really? You thought 2 hours was only 15 minutes? I mean, I'm bad with time management and timelines, but come on. 15 minutes is $100 and count as 1. VIP regular song dances are $20. Again, there are signs everywhere. When you walk in, next to the VIP, literally everywhere. It says 1 hour is $400. He brings the manager to the side and is telling him I never told him when the next dance was starting. Keep in mind, this is what I did, as I had a feeling I needed to be very clear. No, I did not tell him, hey, another song is going. That would be crazy because that would be 40 times I would have to tell him, and that would disrupt the whole dance. However, I did ask him to set a timer for 15 minutes on his own phone. I reset it 4 times. 4! That's $400. Then, after each of the next 4 dances, I moved us 3 separate times, between each other VIP. I was under the impression that this was very clearly telling him. It was another one. So my manager specifically says, if you did not tell him, hey, it's going to be another VIP and another $100, then it's too bad. Sorry. You're kidding, right? Y'all are gonna side with him so you guys believe the customer over the girl who you get tipped from constantly and work closely with? I'm sorry, but that's crazy. What's the point of posted signs if they don't matter? Again, I've never had an issue quite like this until now. Management has been bad since my old manager, who was very, very good and old school, moved out of the state. We're constantly overcharged for dances and he constantly counts way too many. I don't know if it's to keep his numbers up or because he's really not paying attention, but either way, it's really irritating because unless I'm paying exact attention to what he's writing down, I don't always catch it. This could mean a difference of up to $100 per shift, 2 nights a week. Now for my point. I'm open to ideas if you have any, but this is my plan for this weekend, and if you'd like to add to my contract or think I need to change the writing or verbiage in any way, please feel free to let me know. I have written up a contract. I'm not done with it yet, but basically, name, club, details change to protect me specifically. Contract says, in this written contract, the customer may be named or unnamed, may be referred to as client or customer. The party is referenced multiple times and will refer to the person receiving the VIP lap dance from Candace or a combination of Candace and any other entertainer/independent contractor. The client is you, the unknown but named herein, client who is a customer at Candy Painted Darlings on this date logged into this mobile apparatus. By initialing this, you agree to enter in a contract with Candace, whose legal name shall be redacted for their privacy and safety. This contract is legally binding and your signature will be on camera, owned by Candy Painted Darlings. By agreeing, you hereby give your signed consent to do lap dances with Candace at Club Candy Painted Darlings. These dances are legal, and the independent contractor in question is fully licensed by the city of Des Moines and is in the system as such. You hereby give your consent to be charged per 15 minutes with no maximum. You hereby give consent and agree that you're responsible for paying attention to the time and listen for the alarms, if used, at each interval. Intervals counted per VIP at 15 minutes each. Alternatively, you can listen to the songs and count them as well. 4.5 songs equals 1 15-minute VIP. You hereby give consent to agree to giving up your payment in full after service is rendered, and you agree you will not go to the management to demand you pay less than the amount specified herein. You hereby agree to litigation if you do not pay in full at the specified time. immediately or otherwise specified by Candace. You hereby agree to arbitration to avoid any litigation against Candace or affiliates. This includes Candy Painted Darlings. You hereby give your consent to be posted in any and all Facebook groups or social media apps to be identified if and only if you run out or do not pay. This is usually an attempt to find out who you are and identify you for litigation purposes. You hereby give consent to release your ID if you cannot pay in full on location after service is rendered. Your ID will then be given back to you as payment is received. Your ID will be safe, and the only way it will be used is to receive payment by using your address or to serve papers. You hereby give consent to be ridiculed and put on a list of clients who do not pay. This is if, and only if, you do not pay for services rendered. You hereby release any right to litigation against Candace and all affiliates and employees of Candy Painted Darlings. You agree to respect any and all requests and boundaries by Candace and will not force yourself or any part of your body on her in any way. You agree to be discreet, respectful, and treat Candace and other employees and independent contractors with respect. Most of all, you're expected to have fun and enjoy your time. Signed, OP. Well, this just sucks mainly because the employer isn't supporting the employee's discretion in this particular situation. The contract almost seems satirical, but like there's obviously truth behind it as well. It sucks that that's necessary and that people are just willing to do anything to get their entertainment and save a few extra bucks. Very unfortunate. Invalid Consciousness responded, "Your contract is rambling and you're tripping over legal language trying to sound important while just obfuscating the meaning. If you want it to be watertight, hire an actual lawyer to write it. No client is going to sign multiple pages of legalese, and especially not your rambling wannabe legalese, to get a lap dance. If you want the client to actually sign it, keep it short and clear. It will be just as enforceable in small claims court." Hyperactive Meow replied, "LOL, I've written quite a few contracts, and this took like 5 minutes of voice to text. That's literally the point of the contract, is to sound confusing as F so you miss things. I'm not sure why everyone's thinking that I'm doing this to be serious. It's so that I can comply maliciously and make a point to my management. It has nothing to do about protecting me in the long run. This only happened once in all the time I've been in the industry. I'm not actually worried about the customers." Our next story is some malicious railroad compliance. Train driver here, somewhere in Europe. I recently remembered a case of malicious compliance I was involved in years ago. During a typical early shift, we're usually driven from our depot to the train yard by a van. This yard was rather large, stretching for kilometers with countless tracks. Every day, each and every train set and locomotive goes through a thorough inspection, with safety systems and brakes being extensively tested. And we take these tests very seriously. If the excrement were to hit the fan, we would be in the front row quite literally. That day, one of the final tests failed. I couldn't resolve the issue myself, and the help desk didn't see an immediate solution either. So I called dispatch for instructions. Meanwhile, we were about 20 minutes away from the time I was supposed to leave. I would leave the yard empty, without passengers, to drive to my departure station. "Hello, train 1234 here. I'm experiencing technical issues and cannot depart from the yard." "Okay, fine. We have a spare on track L7. You can take that one." So I started walking there. L7 was about a 15-minute walk away from where I was standing. When I arrived there 5 minutes before the intended departure time, I saw that this train hadn't been used for several days. The brakes, doors, and pantographs of the train all operate on air pressure. Since this train had been stationary for so long, the air reservoirs were completely empty. It would take at least 10 minutes just to start the preparation process, which itself would take at least another 20 minutes. Just as I put the train into service and the compressors were running to fill the reservoirs, I got another call from dispatch. "Hello, train 1234 driver here. Dispatch here. Are you ready to depart?" "No, I need at least another 30 minutes. "If you can't depart within the next 10 minutes, it won't be necessary anymore." "You realize I just told you I need at least 30 minutes. "Yes." "Okay, understood." It wasn't uncommon for dispatch to try to pressure drivers like this, trying to get them to cut corners and depart as quickly as possible. After all, there was still some buffer time at the departure station, so it wasn't a very big deal if we had to leave somewhat later than intended. This tactic sometimes worked on young, inexperienced drivers, but not on the seasoned drivers like me. That day, I just had enough of being rushed through mandatory safety tests. So I shut everything down, applied the parking brakes, slung my backpack over my shoulder, and began the long walk back to the depot. The instructions were clear. 10 minutes, otherwise it wasn't needed anymore. The fallout, half an hour later, I got another call, once again from dispatch. Driver 1234 here. Driver 1234, here's dispatch. Is there a problem? Your signal is open, but your train isn't moving. No, I'm walking back to the depot on foot. But you told me you needed 30 minutes to prepare the train. And you told me that if I couldn't depart within 10 minutes, it wouldn't be necessary anymore. You know full well that's not what I meant. I'm expected to follow instructions, not read minds. A few days later, my direct supervisor, a veteran who always stood up for his men, called me into his office. "Gnor, what was the problem yesterday?" he asked with a big wink. I honestly don't understand it myself. I was told that if I couldn't depart within 10 minutes, it wouldn't be necessary anymore. I needed at least 30 minutes, so I drew my own conclusions. Big wink in return. Dispatch says since all calls are recorded, we can easily find out what dispatch told me. Long story short, I never heard anything about it again. For the next few weeks, dispatch was noticeably more cautious when trying to rush me and my colleagues. But of course, it didn't take long before they fell back into their old habits. You know, if you're gonna cut corners for whatever reason, it can't come at the expense of health and safety inspections. That is just like massive liability nightmare. Why would you even consider that? Good job, OP. Kilted Turtle responded, I had a similar story about a package. Supervisor was all about this rush package must go out today. Informed them that the last UPS/FedEx pickup was at 4. We're not going to make that timeline. Well, if it doesn't go out today, then there's no sense in shipping it. Okay, fine. Supervisor came back at 4:30, looked around, no parts, no package, and said, "Oh good, you made the time and the shipment got out." "No, we said we couldn't make that shipping time. You said to not bother. Since the parts were no longer in a shipment, we put the parts back into inventory." Silence. Then, "How about we pack the order up and see if we can make the 4 p.m. pickup tomorrow?" "No problem, we can do that." They were much nicer about rush shipments after that. Our next story is, you want me to delete my account in front of you? Okay, done. A bit of background first. 15 years ago, I worked at a gas station as an opener. Because I was young and somewhat tech-savvy, I was also the de facto IT for the 3 stores near me, and had been heavily involved in setting up a new point of sale, POS system, for their 2 most successful stores when they were swapped from one gas brand to another. The company had made me the super admin on all registers just for ease of transition. Remember this later. The owner's wife had been awful to me for the 2 years that I worked there. I got bumped to opener by her husband, and she hated to have a man be an opener. Historically, every single opener was picked by her and was a woman, but her husband came and fired the previous opener for theft while the 2 of us were swapping shifts. So I got a promotion of sorts. The wife was constantly scrutinizing everything that I did, constantly calling me in the mornings to be rude and berate me for a bunch of minor things I did wrong. "You used wet wipes on the area around the drink machine. I want you to use paper towels and spray." We were out of paper towels, and the spray we had smelled like a hospital anyway. "I came in your store last night, and there were 3 rows of Snapple apple. You could probably increase sales by putting 1 or 2 of those rows to a different product, even though the Snapple fridge was 100% handled by the vendor, and we'd signed a contract that we couldn't change the layout of product, etc., etc. Long story short, she was awful to me because I was a dude. I had set up their POS systems because I was somewhat tech-savvy. I was made super admin on the new registers they had. I was desperately looking for work when I found a temp IT job, which led to my current career in IT. I got a new job offer and gave her husband 2 weeks' notice, but never told her because I did my very best to avoid talking to her unless necessary. When she found out, it was Tuesday of my last week, and she legitimately lost her mind, gave me a ton of stuff to do, and worked me to the bone until 2 p.m. on the last Friday I worked. Finally, the time to depart forever came, and she personally came with an office worker and stood by me and asked me to delete my account from the register. I knew I was a super admin, and I had been told if I ever left to convert the account. She had been told this, but had long forgotten it, so I said to heck with it and complied, then went to the other store and did likewise while she watched. I go about my life, start my new job, and end up about 3 weeks in when I get a frantic voicemail and like 20 texts and calls from her. I called the office worker who had stood over my shoulder with her and got the scoop. She basically couldn't change any prices at all when new beer and soda prices started rolling out, and her new opener had just let it all pile up because she didn't know how to do it, and they were going to have someone come train her. They had a bunch of items, 5 or 10% below the price they were supposed to be at. Margins on cases of beer are low, and this was nuking their profits. Once I thought it over, I texted her and said, "You asked me to do this. It's on video, and we have 3 witnesses. The person she had me training, the person I swapped with, and the office worker who had quit in the 2 weeks since." Click, edit. I didn't hang up on her, I'm just being funny. I found out later that they ended up spending $6,000 to get the company back out to fix the issue. The boss's wife legit had a Facebook page at one point with people planning to crap on her grave when she died one day. Edit for clarity, she's still alive. So I wasn't the only person she was awful to, but I do feel like I got one up on her, and it feels good. This revenge or malicious compliance, it was a slow burn, but man, was it worth it. Props to OP for enduring the struggle, and then once you finally got out of there, you could just enjoy the place burning down. Los and Dancer 28 replied, "The ability of people to freak themselves over is astonishing to me. Excellent malicious compliance. Side note, I never understand why people feel the need to apologize for a long story. I love the long ones. The more meaty, the better the story in my opinion, but that's just me." To Sir Prime replied, "So long as it's entertaining, I love long stories. Too many people write novels that get too deep and into minutia that doesn't matter or make the story more entertaining. This is an entertaining story, partially because I already knew where it was going, and I just love the tears of crappy owners as they nourish my soul." Our next story is, "Bye-bye money. I worked at what was recently a bankrupt large restaurant that was very strict with throwing things out if they were out of date. Their self-imposed shelf life was ridiculously low. This matters for later. Funny enough, the managers knew better, and they were worried about food cost, so they would have us relabel for an extra day or two. At one point, a temporary corporate DM took over duties for our location and ended up watching me change dates to keep things a bit longer. The next day, we had a random pre-shift meeting where they brought up that they had noticed people relabeling product. They stressed that this was no longer acceptable. Cue malicious compliance. I had no problems following their rule. The same night, at closing time, I went through every single thing I could find and got rid of it. Walk-in, freezer, dry storage, the whole line. Anything that was labeled and absolutely everything that wasn't labeled. Easily threw out $3K worth of product. Of course, the next day, they went ape crap about it. They called another meeting, this time just mostly going off on how much crap was thrown away. Once they were done ranting, without fixing the problem at all, I waited for the dinner rush to be over and went to the office to talk to them about it. Things got a little heated, but they eventually decided to go back to how things were before. Anyway, I'm happy they died out. They weren't worth the price, and even the reason the business started was kinda messed up. I mean, I'm certainly no expert here, but is that even legal to relabel the shelf life of products? I feel like that could potentially cause health problems if you're serving just out-of-date food all the time. Everyone Dreams replied, "Even though they went out of business, good job on them for not serving out-of-date stuff to customers. Too many places would just straight up serve health hazards." Our next story is, "I got." So this guy got malicious compliance on me yesterday. I currently work in a retail shop selling things, and in this shop, things go with things, meaning you buy big main piece, BMP you want, then we tailor the rest of the pieces to work with the big piece, and suddenly you have a customized package that costs twice as much that does its job and is pretty awesome. So customer comes in and asks a few questions about BMP. I ask him a few identifying questions and we go from there. I make a couple recommendations for BMP, he likes it, asks a few more questions, and we settle in on a BMP. Awesome. From there, we go to customization, and settle on 5 or 6 accessory pieces to complete the package. A pretty big sale for us. Before he swipes his card, I run him through the complimentary brochure, service, maintenance, resources, etc. I say, "And here's a $50 store credit to use on your next purchase." And he says, "Can I use it today? Apply it toward the accessory?" I say, "It's good on your next visit, sir." And he says, "Okay, charge me for BMP today, put the rest aside and I'll pick it up tomorrow. Or maybe I won't, who knows." I pause and then say, "Sir, I'll go ahead and honor that credit for you today." And then he smiles and says, "Thought you might." Back's against the wall, they've got you by the proverbial balls, you have to make a sale, so yeah, I get it, I would probably fold in this situation too. Ophichos commented, "I had this with a supermarket that kept giving vouchers. I'd go in and get 40 quids worth of stuff, pay, get a voucher, keep receipt, and not even leave the shop, but go in for the second round and use the voucher. Got funny looks if it was the same cashier." S23Unknown replied, "Best to do this at a self-service checkout. They can't make you move on. You can check out as many times as you want while standing there. My record is 5 to make sure I got coupons, discounts on the right items and separate transactions. Because why is it applying the 20% off to a £3 item by default when it could also be applied to my £20 item instead? Our next story is, you said to unalive the print job. I was working at a major equipment manufacturer as a sysadmin. One day, a salesman came charging into the admin area yelling about his report not printing. So I called up the spooler and saw a huge 140 megabyte print job clogging the queue. This was back in the days of text-based everything. The report would have been thousands of pages long. I told him what the problem was, and he told me to unalive the big print job, as he had to get his report out. I killed it. About 10 minutes later, he was back saying his report had vanished. I said, "You told me to unalive it. Do you think I would have killed someone else's print job on your command?" He got a bit upset, so I called up his keyboard logger, which he didn't know about. I looked at the SQL command and said, "You were trying to print out every sale every person made for the last 5 years. He wanted me to fix it, but as a sysadmin, I did not have access to do anything to the Oracle database except run the nightly backups. Go see a database admin." Got a call from the lead database admin asking why the salesman had command line access to the database. I had no idea, but I called up the keyboard logger for the salesman and said he's logged in as DBA who left the company. Oops, the account was killed and the salesman got fired. Spirited Voice 7191 responded, "I had a friend who had to deal with this monthly print job from some manager that ate nearly a whole box of Green Bar. He demanded that it not be split between boxes, so my friend had to set it to hold until he could load a new box. After many months, he noticed the guy would review the summaries on the last few pages, tear those off, and leave the rest for my friend to have to shove into the narrow slot of the confidential trash can. He tried to show the guy how to just print the pages he needed, offered to get the DBA to make a report of just the summaries he needed, etc. No luck. He needed to write the whole report in case the summary showed a problem that he would need to drill down into, and he couldn't wait for that to be printed later if needed. After more than a year of this, never needing the full support, my friend configured the room so the job ran from the printer across a long table and directly into the con-can. He said if the guy needed the rest, it was still attached and he could be pulled out. The other operators thought it was the best thing ever. That manager, of course, flipped out and called his big gun friends. They had a meeting where my friend expected to find the results to at least be written up, if not fired. He never heard what went on in the meeting, but the next month, the print job was just the summaries. Our next story is Bakery Catastrophe. Thank you to the user Kiltastic84 for reminding me of my own disaster. To preface this, I'll explain how the bakery worked. Each day we had a baking plan. Based on sales figures, etc., head office generated that plan. Come afternoon time, said plan would also tell you how many of each item you should have available. So if you had 10, the plan stated 23. You would have to bake 13. Enter our new fledgling area manager. He decides that actually the bakers need to bake whatever the full amount for the afternoon says. Now, I tried to warn him. I begged the store manager. I knew what would happen, but orders are orders. I was thoroughly bollocked and told to do my job. So much waste. Instead of 30 pounds appropriately worth of product per evening, we were hitting nearly 300 pounds. Halfway through the week, store manager tries approaching me about the write-offs being a bit higher than usual, so I could figure it out, but still do the full bake as requested from above. After a week, he and store manager both broke and admitted I was right, and they had to take their own bollocking from the head office. Trickle-down diplomacy is definitely a hazard if not appropriately administered. Oftentimes, it's the people on the front lines working that know the most about the product going out, so at least they admitted their mistake and, got chewed out for it. Chmath80 commented, "Seen this sort of thing a lot. Used to get boxes of bagels delivered to the supermarket. Sometimes 30 boxes, different varieties, 8 bagels to a box. There might be 15 to 20 boxes left unsold by the B-date. Occasionally, the delivery guy would turn up, and we would give him more boxes of returns than he was delivering of new stock. This went on for a couple of years. We didn't care because they were sale or return, but it was obviously very wasteful, and I had to wonder how they managed to stay in business. How hard could it be to keep a record of sales at each store, and use that to decide on production and delivery quantities? No, that's too hard. Let's just keep wasting a fortune making thousands of bagels every week that we're never going to get paid for." Cynical Mage replied, "That hurts my soul. I loathe food waste. I've been hungry and homeless, and every day so many people are dying for lack of food. One thing I kinda broke the rules with was, at cleanup during whenever I was on a closing shift instead of morning baking, I implemented a routine of loading up a couple of trays with an assortment of pastries and donuts to put in the canteen for the night team. The food was counted and written off, but at least some of it was eaten instead of scraped into a bin." Our next story is Malicious Compliance in the 1930s. Here's a story that was passed down to me by my mom. My mom's great-uncle survived polio as a child in the early 1900s, but his lack of physical ability drove him to books and learning. He did very well academically and graduated with honors from a prestigious university. My mom has his diploma, his grade sheets, and even a personal letter of recommendation from the university president. Despite his physical disabilities, he went on to become an accomplished high school teacher. After many years of successful teaching, the administration began to enforce a policy that all teachers must be certified and pass a teaching exam. He agreed to take the test, but he was so insulted that they would question his academic qualifications that he threw in a little malicious compliance. He answered all the questions in Latin. Since none of the staff could read his answers, they just dropped the issue, and he was allowed to continue his teaching. That's a nice little flex, like not only do I have the credentials, but I can give them to you in a completely different language that you guys don't understand. Love it. Angry Accountant 31 said, "My grandpa had to take an entry-level German class when he went to college, despite being fluent in both high and low German from high school. When asked how he would make a simple statement, he promptly used such a wordy expression that the teacher asked for the English translation. Ended up getting drafted right after college to work counter-intel in post-World War II Germany because he could pass as a German civilian." Our next story is, you can't have a phone until your brother needs a new phone. This one is short and sweet. This happened about 20 years ago. I desperately wanted a cell phone. I did not have one at the time. In a family of 4, my older brother had our sole cell phone line at the time. He needed it for some reason. My parents had an arbitrary rule. I couldn't have a phone until my brother needed a new phone. I'm not sure if there was a deal at the time, like get 2 lines or a family plan and save money, but that was the rule. My brother's phone was perfectly fine, until I broke it. Got my Nokia phone soon afterwards. Edit, because so many people have asked this question. I slammed the phone vertically, antenna up, on the garage cement floor. It managed to break the parts that held the battery in place. Technically, the phone still worked if you held the battery in place, but the battery would slip out if you didn't. With some tape, it could have still functioned, but the damage/annoyance was enough to justify a new phone. Kind of a weird rule set by the parents, but I'm not surprised at all to hear that even despite this destruction, the phone still somehow worked. Like, old phones back then were like military weapons. They were so durable. IR Engineer replied, "So I guess in OP's case, the plan was to not give him the old phone when Big Brother upgraded. I could only have a bicycle once my sister got a new one. Then I could have the old one. Before that, we supposedly shared the bike. That meant that even if my sister wasn't going to use the bike, she wasn't allowed to say I couldn't." Rabbit Ian replied, "One of my friends in high school basically had the same issue. Her older sister, we'll call her Mary, was the golden child, and my friend, Sarah, was essentially an afterthought, so she would only get things when her sister didn't want them anymore. Also, if Mary broke something that belonged to Sarah, their parents would blame Sarah for it and wouldn't get her a replacement, even if it was something she needed, like a calculator for school. But if Mary destroyed her own property, her parents would immediately rush out and buy her a new whatever it was. Mary would also refuse to let Sarah play with or use anything they supposedly shared, even if she wasn't using it. And if Sarah tried, Mary would run to their parents and tell them Sarah had stolen it. It was, among many other reasons, why my friend moved out the day she turned 18 and didn't keep in contact with her family after that." Our next story is, desperately need a new phone? We got you covered. There's always this one person that is so very important that he always needs to tell everybody how important he is and how urgent his, or her, or their, but in this story it's a he, requests are. Usually this goes hand in hand with utter incompetence and a generally nasty attitude. This is the story about one such person. We were about to buy new work phones. It was more than time. The iPhone SEs, the higher-ups thought suitable, were even 5 years ago better toys. The batteries drained quickly and never gave our users a really good experience. We decided to wait until the new SE, now Es, would be available, but news got around very quickly. Ever since my first rumor about new shiny toys got around, there was this one salesperson who came into my office twice a week to complain about his phone and how he desperately needed a new phone and how important it was to get him a new phone ASAP. No, he didn't need it, more than our guys out in the field, but boy did he cry about the thing. In the last 3 weeks, he went to our boss 3 times to complain that we did not want to give him a new phone. Boss rolled his eyes and suggested we should do something. Well, we had this one iPhone 13, new, still in the box, for emergencies. So last Thursday, as he came in again to whine about his awful phone, I was very glad to help him. As his phone was so bad and he needed a new phone so badly, we could provide him with a new phone immediately. He was quite obviously not happy that he got the old iPhone 13, but as he had complained so loudly and the CEO himself had greenlit this new phone for him, there was nothing he could do other than clench his fist and pretend to be happy that his severe situation was taken care of. We informed the CEO that the situation was settled. He smiled and ordered new iPhone 16Es and Pixel 9 the same day. Never be a pain in the butt to your IT. This is great. He got a new phone. Who says that you're entitled to an upgrade? If your phone isn't working, if it's really that bad, obviously we're using hyperbole here, but any phone in that situation would suffice. So yeah, enjoy that 13. Ginorama CA responded, "So I used to work at Apple, and on my team, hardware just fell out of the sky. This tended to make people very entitled and expect new phones, Macs, and watches at the snap of a finger. I was in charge of Macs on our team, and I witnessed this firsthand. I had no problem disabusing people of their notions that I was a computer dispenser. Okay, so this was around the time of the iPhone X. Very exciting because it was the first unit that did away with the home button. Typically, when a product is first released, production units are not as plentiful. I had a nice 7 Max, so I wasn't chomping at the bit. I knew one would come my way eventually. I was in the lab picking up some units and shooting the crap with a buddy. There was a lady looking for some stuff in an equipment drawer. She wasn't very well liked on the team because she had the habit of exaggerating how hard she worked on even basic tasks. Another buddy swung by and checked his phone, an iPhone X. He happened to be the guy in charge of certification, so it made sense that he'd be one of the early folks to get one. The not well-liked lady saw this and commented that everyone but her had one. I pulled out my 7 and said I didn't have one yet, and I was fine waiting. I don't remember her response, but she found her crap and left the area. My buddy with the phone looked at me and said, "You don't have one yet? I have one for you," and took one out of his desk safe. So be cool and patient and things will come. Our next story is just something to make it better. I used to be the systems admin engineer / everything at a company of about 300 people. Most of them were remote salespeople with laptops, and most of the salespeople had unpaid interns in this training program that, to me, seemed like heck. The interns were provisioned with any computer that I could cobble together. Part of the program was getting the commissions enough to earn an office and computer. Seemed stupid to me, but not my policies. These things were mid-grade Dell workstations that, when they were new, they had long surpassed their useful life cycle. The president, the co-owner, the VP, HR, and my leadership will not allow new equipment allocation to the interns under any circumstances. Not even $10 keyboards that come with new computers. It has to be decommed from an employee or sales rep to get into the hands of the interns. Well, another quirk about this company is that your service priority was determined by your performance in sales, which meant that mentors would advocate for their interns and there was constant squabbling over who got less crappy equipment, and nearly every sales rep was a self-empty jerk. One rep was having a particularly good year, and one of his interns had one of the better crap boxes, but complained about it constantly. I already pool RAM and swap processors whenever possible, so this rep, we'll call him John, calls me into his office every week or so to disparage me because I'm the one responsible for his intern being held back. Note that the reps are allowed to pay for gear for interns if they want to pay for it, but they never do. Eventually, the company VP, a self-important jerk that the president liked but failed utterly as a salesperson, calls me into his office to discuss my attitude. I'm extremely professional at work and took the beating. VP knew the situation but took John's side and ordered me to improve the situation in some way. Do something, anything to enable the success of the intern. Make sacrifices if you have to. Fine. I had an off-brand computer case in my office that was gathering dust. It was there when I started and I had no idea where it came from. Over the weekend, I transplanted everything in the intern's workstation to the computer case. Since it was coming from a Dell workstation, I had to remove all the slides and parts that make the thing easy to service, but I made it fit. It was a rush job and a monstrosity, and I got to bill time for it. I had to fashion a metal sheen to cover the holes that the main board didn't extend to, but it worked. Same insides. Oh, and because it was such a mess, I had to leave a stick of RAM out since it wouldn't fit. Oh, and I accidentally dropped the processor that I didn't need to remove and had to put in another processor from another machine that was slightly slower. Carefully removed the Windows sticker from the old case and put it on the new case too. Got into work on Monday and plugged it in. A few hours later, I got called down to John's office and figured I was in for it. The thing was even crappier than before, but in a different, not better, container. Intern was beaming, John was beaming, VP was beaming. They thanked me for my hard work and gave me a $5 gift card to a coffee shop. Well, I think all of this malicious compliance was certainly worth it for that $5 gift card to coffee at the end. I mean, is there anything you wouldn't do for a $5 gift card to coffee? Just saying. Starfury42 said, I worked for lawyers and contract attorneys got a single screen desktop. One asked for a second screen to work more efficiently. My boss says, no, not policy. I pass this on and close the ticket. Partner calls in and I get the call. He wants to know why, and I pass on policy while we discuss that time equals money. Considering the attorney is paid $125 an hour as a contractor, if they can work 20% faster, the monitor is paid for fairly fast, and it's there for the next person who uses the computer. I send the call to my director, and the partner read her the riot act, and the contract addy got their dual screens, along with every other contract addy computer in that office. Our next story is, no assistant for me? Let's see how that works out. This happened almost 15 years ago when I was still living in my home country. I worked in a warehouse that served as a distribution center for a supermarket chain. A very famous one, by the way. I was an inspector in the shipping department. Basically, the sorting section would bring to the docks the goods that the store had requested, and we would prepare and load the shipment onto the truck. In the shipping department, there were assistants who did the manual work, assembling the loads on pallets, wrapping them with stretch film, and loading them onto the truck, while the inspector checked whether everything being sent to the store was correctly labeled and secure for transport. Additionally, the inspector entered all data in the internal system, sealed the truck, and printed the load summary for the administrative department to generate an invoice. Of course, inspectors also helped the assistants with the heavy lifting. Most of the time, this didn't interfere with our main responsibilities and actually sped up the process, especially since our shift, the afternoon shift, had an issue with trucks arriving late. Many times, we wouldn't finish everything on time, leading to overtime and sometimes having to leave the remaining work for the night shift, which wasn't ideal since each shift had its own list of stores to attend to, and this delay affected them. Each inspector worked with at least one assistant, but sometimes more, depending on their workload. Some inspectors had more stores to handle that day. Some stores required extra loads or other situations that called for additional help. We had a supervisor who had been with the company for many years and had worked in the department before being promoted. The job was great and everything ran smoothly, until a crisis hit another department, leaving it without a supervisor. Management decided they needed someone experienced to lead that department, so they transferred our supervisor there. In his place, they promoted someone from another department who had no leadership experience. Our department was running well, with no need for drastic changes, but our new supervisor didn't see it that way. One day, I arrived at work, and as usual, at the beginning of the shift, the supervisor printed out a sheet listing the stores to be handled that day, along with which inspector was assigned to each one. So far, so good. He made some changes, but nothing too concerning. However, before we started working, he called the entire department for a quick meeting. In this meeting, he announced that he had reassigned which assistants would work with which inspectors and showed us a printed list. To my surprise, there was no name next to mine. In other words, I was expected to work without an assistant. I protested immediately. I don't remember the exact details of the discussion, as it happened a long time ago, but basically, his idea was that as other assistants finished helping their assigned inspectors, whoever was available would come help me. Something that already happened naturally, as we had a strong sense of camaraderie in our department. Plus, no one wanted to be seen by the bosses standing around doing nothing. But it wasn't enough. It would overburden me. I tried to argue my case, but I couldn't convince him. Other inspectors were also left without assistance, but they were relatively new to the company and didn't say anything, probably out of fear of losing their jobs or something similar. Well, since I couldn't change his mind, I accepted that I would be working without an assistant. I took the signs for the chores I was responsible for, found available docks for them, placed the signs on the dock gates, noted on the printed sheet which stores were at which docks, then went to the dock of the first store I would handle. I leaned against the wall, crossed my arms, and waited. Goods started arriving, but I didn't touch a single box. The dock filled up, and I didn't move an inch. After a few hours, the supervisor walked through the department to check on things, saw the state of my dock, and asked why the load wasn't being prepared. I simply said, "I don't have any assistants. How am I supposed to prepare the load?" and remained standing with my arms crossed. Eventually, some assistants came to help me, and when they did, I helped them with the heavy lifting. But soon, the inspectors they were originally assigned to needed more help, and of course, they left my load behind. By the end of the shift, one load was ready to be loaded onto the truck, but another was only halfway done. I placed the paperwork with the load details in a visible spot for whoever would finish it and left. As I was leaving, my supervisor asked about the loads. Without turning around, I told him where the papers were. He asked if I wasn't going to finish them, and I didn't even respond. The next day, he called me in for a meeting. When I arrived, the manager was also there. They asked me what happened the previous day, and I replied, "Nothing that I remember." They brought up the incomplete loads. I explained that my shift had ended and I couldn't stay for overtime, so I left the information for whoever would finish the job, and I even told the supervisor where the papers were. Then I took out my wallet, pulled out my time card receipt, and showed them that I'd clocked out at the designated time. They mentioned that I spent most of the shift standing with my arms crossed. I responded that I had done my job, which, as stated in my contract, consisted solely of verifying the load, supervising assembly and loading, entering data into the system, sealing the truck, and printing the load summary. Nothing beyond that. I continued by saying that anything else I might do during my shift was purely out of goodwill to help the assistants and speed up the work. But on the previous day, I had chosen to exercise my right not to perform those extra tasks because I felt unfairly treated by my supervisor, who had not assigned me a dedicated assistant. That would have significantly overburdened me with tasks I wasn't paid to do. The manager simply looked at the supervisor and said he needs to have an assistant. Then he turned to me and asked me to leave. The two of them stayed there for quite a while. That same day, I was assigned an assistant, and we never spoke of it again. Nothing like that ever happened again. The new supervisor's stint lasted only a few months before he returned to his previous role. He had put too much trust in employees he was friends with, but who weren't very competent at their jobs, and that was his downfall. Our old supervisor came back to his position, and everything improved again. Well, at least you endured, and you're not afraid to state your mind. Instead of just throwing a temper tantrum, you were able to provide why you did what you did, and ultimately you got what you wanted, so good for you. Our next story is my new favorite bartender. I ducked into a cozy, quiet pub in Little Venice for late lunch last Friday, and to catch up on some work emails while I was on vacation in London. In walks this man who gets a pint and sits down, but then starts barking orders across the dining room to the bartender to come turn on the TV to some sports. Finally, after his third complaint that there are no sports to watch, she marches in the dining room with the remote. On comes the TV. "ESPN then?" she asked him. Yes, he replied. She flipped it on, waited for the commercial to end, then smiled at him when they returned to the game of women's cricket. Nodded at him, then turned and went back to the bar. He finished his beer quickly, then quietly left. I mean, if you don't know what sports are on or what quote-unquote sports you even want to watch, you're clearly just a poser, right? Trying to look cool in your pub, drinking your pint. Not knocking on women's Quidditch. I just said Quidditch. Cricket, of course. But yeah, no. See right through the tough guy act here. Good story. And our next story is I Live to Serve. Some background context before I begin. I work in a very small medical practice. We're currently looking to add a new front desk position in our office to help me. The main front desk person and my boss, the MD who owns the practice, had asked me for help conducting phone interviews. She also sent me like 10 candidates to schedule for this week, and we have a very limited window in our workday when these interviews can take place. This morning, my boss came into our office on one, ripped me a new one for something I'm not in control of, went to my coworker's office, ripped her a new one for something also not in my coworker's control, then came to me and asked why I had to reschedule some of the phone interviews my coworker and I were going to conduct yesterday afternoon. I explained to her that she, had been running 30 minutes behind with patients, so my coworker and I needed to focus on the patients in front of us, and the two people I had needed to interview were super chill and flexible when I asked if it was okay to move their interviews to the next afternoon. My boss responded with, "I don't want you doing interviews anymore. You're too busy. I only want you to schedule them for me and our other provider who was not in today. We cannot be moving them around." I responded with, "Okay," and immediately moved the 3 interviews I had scheduled for myself this afternoon to her calendar, which, combined with the 3 interviews she already had scheduled, filled her calendar for the entire afternoon. She reached out to me and asked why all these interviews were suddenly on her calendar, and I replied, "You told me this morning you didn't want me doing any of the interviews, so I moved them to your calendar, and you told me we couldn't move them, so I'm not sure how you want to proceed." She said, "Yeah, I'll take care of them." "I'm sure you will, boss lady, I'm sure you will, and this is probably going to be the last day that you conduct 6 interviews in a day, if you get my drift." Bright Claim 32 responded, "Man, that's like classic office chaos. Reminds me of when my wife tells me to help in the kitchen, and then when I burn toast, she gives me that look, you know? Like, I should have just handled this myself." You're kind of stuck in a no-win there. I think every office has that one boss who gets on a power trip, but tries to manage everything themselves when they think everyone else is screwing up. It's like when I'm organizing a barbecue. I want to delegate, but I'm also there meddling in everything because I think nobody can manage my prized ribs recipe like I do, even though I do the same thing every single time. Anyway, sounds like you handled it perfectly. You did exactly what was asked of you. Sometimes you gotta let them have their aha moment on their own. Wonder how she's handling those interviews now. Alright everybody, that is all the time we have for today. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like and comment down below. And if you want to check out any of our other videos, click the video on the right. With that being said, I will see you all next time.